Hello and welcome back to Connect the World. I'm Lynda Kinkade. Well, just hours ago, the top US diplomat on the ground in Myanmar addressing the humanitarian crisis that's driving Rohingya out of the country. Rex Tillerson met with leader Aung San Suu Kyi. She's facing intense pressure to end the violence against the Muslim minority. But he stopped short of joining the UN in labelling the crisis ethnic cleansing.
We're deeply concerned about credible reports of widespread atrocities committed by Myanmar's security forces and by vigilantes who were unrestrained by the security forces during the recent violence in Rakhine State. We're also distressed by the fact that hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children have been forced to flee to Bangladesh.
Well, more than 600,000 Rohingya refugees have left Myanmar since August. That's what we're hearing from aid agencies. And most of the violence has taken place in Myanmar's Rakhine State. CNN's Clarissa Ward shows us what this mass exodus into Bangladesh is like. Here's her exclusive report.
At first light, you can see them dotted along the coastal road. Homeless, stateless, huddled in the cool dawn. They are known as the most persecuted minority in the world. The distance they have come is not far, but the journey is long. For many, it begins on this river. That's Myanmar on the other side. Every day, hundreds of Rohingya Muslims try to cross it to safety.
So we can see now coming towards the shore, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different rafts. All of them have at least 20 to 30 people on them.
Crudely made of plastic and bamboo and laden with whatever belongings could be salvaged. They're not welcome on this shore. The Coast Guard waves them further on. So we wade out to talk to them.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. How are you? How many hours have you been on the boat? Since early in the morning? Do you know how to swim?
No one does, yet the raft is full of children. Of course we are worried. Look, she has 2 babies, this woman tells us. The kids were practically slipping off the raft. The UN says that scores of Rohingya have died making this crossing, but that hasn't stopped them from trying. We can't follow them any further. And so they drift on down the river, unsure of what awaits them. Their best hope is that they end up in one of these camps that aid workers have called a massive slum in the jungle. Bangladesh is struggling to cope. Another 200,000 refugees are expected in the coming weeks. For the Rohingya, life here is a constant battle. Dignity is hard to come by. These are refugees with no refuge. As dusk approaches, we happen upon a group who made it to shore. They tell us they crossed at 2 a.m. to use the cover of night.
Where will you go from here?
We will go wherever they will take us, she says. But whatever happens, we won't go back. Dependent on the mercy of a world that has so far shown them none. Clarissa Ward, CNN, on the Bangladesh-Myanmar border.
Well, the UN's Agency for Children is just one of the groups trying to take on this humanitarian crisis. Justin Forsyth is UNICEF's Deputy Executive Director, and he joins us now from New York. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Justin, our correspondents have been bringing us these horrific accounts of babies being thrown into fires and children being murdered in front of their parents. How has this been able to go on for so long?
Well, it's a desperate situation on both sides of the border, as you've been reporting. Parents are risking their children's lives by taking them on these rickety rafts into the Bay of Bengal, down these rivers to get to safety. But what must they be fleeing? And we're hearing firsthand as UNICEF some of the stories from children who have made it into Bangladesh. As you say, children who have witnessed their mothers being raped. And one little girl, Aisha, talked about her brother and sister being burnt alive in a house. And what we've seen in northern Rakhine, in this state of Myanmar, is ethnic cleansing on a very big scale. I mean, this used to be 80% Rohingya in the north of Rakhine. I've been there on the ground, and now over 600,000 people have fled. And the violence and brutality is shocking. And we also know in Bangladesh, even after people have reached safety, the situation is very, very serious. I got a report today from our staff, the UNICEF staff on the ground, about a doubling of the number of children with acute watery diarrhea under 5. This is life-threatening. We've had an outbreak of measles. I mean, we have very high levels of malnutrition. So desperate on both sides of the border.
Absolutely desperate. Justin, let's just hear from one of the children caught up in this humanitarian crisis. UNICEF spoke to a young girl who was caring for her 10-month-old sister. Here's what she had to say about the violence.
They were killing, burning houses, slaughtering the people, torturing and abusing. That is why we fled here, torturing and beating.
As you mentioned, more than 600,000 people have fled. More than half of those are children. What needs to happen to help these children, this generation that are traumatized by what they've seen?
Well, firstly, we've got to stop the violence in Rakhine, and our information is that it's still going on, and 2,000 people are still crossing the border, often in these rickety rafts. Once they're in Bangladesh, we need to do much more. Water, sanitation, education, health. We're helping vaccinators, UNICEF, with the Bangladeshi authorities, over 900,000, not just Rohingya, but local people for cholera in the last few weeks alone. But we have to also, as you say, help children overcome the trauma. And we're running these child-friendly spaces. We get children to draw, to play, to be children again, to try and overcome what they've seen and witnessed. But it takes a long time. I mean, the trauma is very deep in these childs, but children do have the ability to bounce back, and expert UNICEF staff are helping them on the ground.
It is great you and your team are on the ground there. Justin, I just want to go back to the comments by the US Secretary of State. Others have come out, like the EU and the UK and the UN, and have called this outright ethnic cleansing. But Mr. Tillerson stopped short of that. He says that the Rohingya crisis shows signs of crimes against humanity, but he wants an investigation. What are the implications of not calling it out?
Well, it's very important that he's there and meeting Aung San Suu Kyi. I also hope he's meeting the head of the military for the whole country. I met him too when I was there, and he's the man, even more than Aung San Suu Kyi, has real power over the situation on the ground. It's important to remember that even though Aung San Suu Kyi is a state councillor, she doesn't actually control the military and what they're doing on the ground, even though she might have influence. But we need both of them to put a halt to the violence. And the US Secretary of State being there is sending a very strong message. And we do need to know what happened specifically on the ground and these violations against human rights. But we also need humanitarian access. We're working still in Rakhine State, but we're not able to go to the very north, even though we've got the teams in the middle of the state and in the capital of the state, Sittwe. So we need to get access now to help people that still haven't crossed over, to help them with water and food, and also to provide protection.
You mentioned Aung San Suu Kyi. We're just seeing pictures of her. She, of course, is a Nobel Peace Prize winner, has a lot of influence in the region, but has essentially sat on her hands. What should she be doing?
She should be using every bit of influence she has to press the military to stop the violence in Rakhine, and also getting agreement for UN agencies, not just UNICEF, but UNHCR, the World Food Programme, to have access on the ground to help the Rohingya and others in Rakhine State. But she also doesn't have huge amounts of power in Rakhine. We have to recognise it's still the military who call a lot of the shots in Myanmar, and so we need to engage them, not just Aung San Suu Kyi.
All right, well, it's great to see UNICEF doing some great work on the ground there. Justin, Forsyth, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, to see who is helping those caught up in this crisis, like UNICEF, head to cnn.com/impact. There's a list of organisations pitching in with aid. And let's not forget Justin's charity, as I mentioned, UNICEF helping, and they are accepting donations at support.unicef.org. We're going to return to some breaking news from Zimbabwe next. The country's economy is a mess and now a military takeover. So what happens next? Correspondents are tracking all angles of this apparent coup from across the region. Stay with us.